continent of Africa, you'll notice the Sahara Desert, which divides North Africa, which we'll be dealing with next week in combination with Southwest Asia, from Sub-Saharan Africa. So there's a significant separation between the cultures and the landscape of North Africa and those areas to the south, or Sub-Saharan Africa. Africa's physiography is quite unique and very different from the areas that we've looked at in the first 2 weeks. It's been called the Plateau Continent. You have relatively high elevations. This is the oldest and most stationary landmass on Earth, actually leading to poor soil quality for agriculture, among other things, and also is very limited in terms of access by boat. You do not have navigable rivers and bays as we saw in our covering Europe a few weeks ago. So it stands in marked contrast. Of course, Africa is the cradle of humanity. In East Africa, what's known as the Great Rift Valley is where humans first began in the year roughly 250,000 years ago. Okay, so if we turn the clock back 250 million years ago, we can see the configuration of the tectonic plates. And what you'll notice here, Africa in the center, and the arrows indicating that all of the other land masses moved away from Africa, but that Africa stayed relatively fixed. And one of the things you'll see that's characteristic of Africa is this Rift Valley system, which affects the eastern part of the continent and actually led to the opening of the Red Sea. The escarpment in southern Africa is located down here, where Antarctica pulled away from the southern part of Africa. Because Africa sits astride the equator, we have a nice pattern of climates with rainy, humid equatorial climates, the AF climates shown here, bordered by a short dry season climate, bordered by a dry winter climate. These are the true tropical climates, again alternating either side of the equator. Semi-arid, this is a steppe or a grassland that is found. This is actually a region just to the south of the Sahara Desert called the Sahel, the S-A-H-E-L. And you'll notice again the arid desert both in the north and the south, semi-arid desert in the north and the south. And then finally we have a Mediterranean CS summer dry climate found both in the north of Africa and also in the southern tip of Africa, along with some no dry season mid-latitude climate found in the south, which is found in North America and Europe as well. You notice precipitation patterns from the rainy equatorial region to the extreme arid conditions of the Sahara. And not surprisingly, vegetation follows this pattern. Tropical rainforests found around the what's called the Congo Basin. We have a deciduous woodland transitioning to what we call a savanna. This light green area is something that I would like to have you focus on. And then outside of that, we have a brush grass savanna. And this is important because the tropical savanna biome is really kind of the characteristic vegetation community of sub-Saharan Africa, characterized by widely spaced trees and grasslands, as you see in the image below, supports the great wildlife herds of Africa, and is really kind of the signature biome of Africa. Okay, so I'm going to introduce a concept of a cultural hearth in this section. And what you see here is that West Africa represents a, let's see if I can open this up a little bit so you can see this a little better. So you see this source area of culture in East Africa, source area around the Nile, and then the sphere of interaction being these lighter areas. And you see that there's an indication of the movement between these different areas. There we go. So another view of that. We see these different ancient states in West Africa, and these states then migrated and their influence moved eastward and westward. We're talking about a situation that kind of characterizes the continent. Among the things that we find in Africa is the greatest cultural diversity found anywhere on our planet, as reflected here by the language diversity that we find in Africa. Keep in mind that, for us in the United States, we speak Spanish and English, English first and foremost, Spanish increasingly, a variety of other languages that are brought in to different ethnic groups. But these are all indigenous, endemic languages that here are characterized by language families. So you see the Niger-Kordofan, which is this kind of purple, and then you see some islands of unique language types, the Khoi and the San. And so this is one of the things that we look at in culture, because language is such an important reflection of culture, and again reflects this very high cultural diversity that we find throughout Africa. Okay, so cultural disruption is one of the characteristics of Sub-Saharan Africa. Not surprisingly, the slave trade shifted the focus to Africa's west coast, and of course the slave trade across the Atlantic to the Americas, both North and South America, was tremendously disruptive to cultures throughout Africa. And later colonies developed along coastal cities, and transportation systems were established for the extraction of resources. Again, something that did not benefit the indigenous peoples of Africa, but rather were designed to support the colonial powers in their economic systems. Eventually, by the 1880s, Africa was almost entirely divvied up among the colonial powers of Europe, as indicated on this map. We're starting off in 1885, and you see how the colonies were mostly established along the coastal areas to facilitate the export of raw materials and goods. By 1910, literally the entire continent had been subdivided among these powers, with a notable exception being Ethiopia, which remained independent, in part because of its natural fortress-like mountainous terrain. And then gradually we start to see a decolonization, and by 1970 virtually all of the African states were free of colonialism, but not free of the legacy of colonialism, which includes corruption, and military run governments has been the dominant trend in Africa, and it's part of the reason we see some of the problems that we do today. Again, the legacy on social and economic systems. So one of the themes that we look at in this part of the course is health geography, and this map illustrates people being affected by natural disasters, and Africa has, the continent itself is subject to wild climatic variation, where you have extreme droughts, followed by periods of flood. You can see the famine indicated. Food security, or the lack of reliable food supplies, is a big problem. And then we have a variety of disaster-related endemics that have resulted, but also endemic diseases and infectious diseases, from malaria to Ebola to the tsetse fly. Again, something that's characteristic of tropical areas in general, but exacerbated in Africa for a variety of reasons. All right, so this map shows the continent or the region, the realm of Sub-Saharan Africa, and the regions that occupy the realm. And you can see that we start in the south with Southern Africa, not to be confused with the country of South Africa, the wealthiest of Africa's countries. And you see this southern tier, East Africa, a lot of tourism in these areas with Kenya and Tanzania. And also this is the volcanic rift zone and the cradle of civilization, as I mentioned. The troubled equatorial region centered on the Congo, or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which continues to be in a civil war. West Africa, these small states that were the center of the ancient cultural hearth, and later the slave trade and the European colonialism of Sub-Saharan Africa. And then you see this transition zone into the Muslim and Arab-dominated North Africa, which we'll talk about next week. All right, so some of the prospects briefly. You'll probably be reviewing these on your own since I'm running out of time. And significant challenges, but Africa's young population will help. Good night.